Right now, in the low light of early morning, I am on my knees in the garden, pushing an empty glass bottle neck first into the soil beside a young tomato plant, until only the round bottom is showing above the dirt like a small glass moon. I will do this 20 more times before breakfast. My neighbors think I am simply throwing away my recycling in a strange fashion. What I am actually doing is building a watering system that will keep my garden alive through the driest week of summer without me lifting a hose even once. And this is only one of 20 things an empty bottle can do for you, if you know how to ask it properly. My name is Kenji Takara. I am from a small village on Okinawa, and I have kept a garden with these two hands for over 50 years. My grandmother fed our whole family from a plot no bigger than most modern backyards, and she never once threw away something that still had work left in it. A cracked pot became a plant marker, a torn net became a trellis, and yes, every bottle that came through our door found a second life before it ever found a trash bin. Today I want to pass 20 of those uses on to you. But I will start with the one that matters most, the one that can genuinely save your garden during a hot, dry summer. Before I do, I want you to understand something about why nobody in a garden center will ever hand you a free glass bottle and explain what I am about to explain. The garden supply industry sells you drip irrigation kits made of thin plastic tubing and little plastic emitters, often $40, $60, even over $100 for a modest-sized garden, and those plastic parts crack in a season or two of sun exposure and need replacing. They sell you plastic cloches, plastic plant markers, plastic seed starting trays, plastic everything. Because plastic is cheap to manufacture and profitable to sell you again next year when it inevitably breaks down in the sun. A glass bottle you already own, already paid for, already sitting in your recycling bin does several of these same jobs, sometimes better, and costs the makers of those plastic products absolutely nothing in your pocket. There is no glass bottle industry lobbying to tell you this. There is only an old man in Okinawa, and now you. Here is the mistake almost everyone makes when they first try burying a bottle to water their garden. I made this exact mistake myself the first time, many years ago, so I say this with real sympathy, not judgment. They take a whole sealed bottle, poke one small hole in the cap, bury it, and wonder why almost no water ever reaches the roots, or why the water sits stagnant and grows algae inside the bottle within a week. A single small hole restricts water far too much, and a bottle with no additional openings along its buried length only releases water from its very tip, missing the wide reach of the root system entirely. The traditional principle behind this, going back centuries to unglazed clay ollas buried in gardens across many old farming cultures, including practices close to my own region, is that water should seep slowly and evenly along the entire buried surface, the way a damp stone slowly darkens all over rather than dripping from one corner. A modified glass bottle can mimic this, but only if you prepare it correctly. So let us begin properly. Step 1. Gather your bottles. Plain glass bottles work best. Wine bottles, glass juice bottles, glass sauce jars, with the labels soaked off in warm soapy water, all free, already in your home. You want bottles with reasonably thick glass, since thin glass can crack under freezing winter soil, and you'll want at least 5 to 10 of them if you want to cover a modest vegetable bed. Step 2, and this is the part that decides whether this whole system actually waters your garden or simply sits there doing nothing, is preparing the bottle to release water the right way, along its whole length, not just from the tip. Take each bottle and, using a small nail and a hammer, or a fine masonry drill bit if you have one, tap several small holes. I use about 6 to 8 holes, each roughly the width of a toothpick, spaced evenly around the lower 2/3 of the bottle, the portion that will sit buried below the soil. Do not put holes near the very top or the neck. That part stays above ground and needs to remain sealed water in from the top. Work slowly and tap gently, especially near the base, because glass will crack under a hard, sudden strike, but tolerates a patient, repeated light tap remarkably well. This is a lesson my grandfather taught me about stone as much as glass. Force rushed is force wasted, and often force that breaks the very thing you meant to shape. Once your holes are made, dig a hole in your garden bed beside the plant or plants you want to water, angled so the bottle will sit at roughly a 30 to 45 degree tilt, neck upward and exposed above the soil surface, body buried down among the root zone, ideally 6 to 8 inches deep for most vegetable plants, shallower for herbs and shallow-rooted crops. Backfill the soil around the buried portion, packing it gently against the bottle so there are no large air gaps, which would let water simply run off instead of soaking into the surrounding earth. Now fill the bottle slowly with water through the open neck at the top. You will see it begin to weep slowly out through your small holes, and this is exactly what you want. A slow, steady seep directly into the root zone, over hours rather than minutes, far more efficient than surface watering, where much of the water evaporates before it ever reaches the roots at all. Depending on your soil and the size of the bottle, one filling can water a plant steadily for 2 to 4 days, sometimes longer in cooler weather. During the hottest weeks of summer, I fill mine every morning. In spring and fall, every 3rd day is often enough. This single trick, costing you nothing but bottles you already have, does what a $60 drip system claims to do, and does it with a material that will never crack from UV exposure the way plastic tubing does, season after season, year after year. Now, let me walk you through the rest of what an empty bottle can do in your garden, because the watering trick, as good as it is only where this begins. For seedlings and young transplants still tender against a late frost or harsh sun, cut the bottom off a clear, plastic-free glass bottle, carefully, using a glass cutter or by scoring with a sharp tile cutter and a gentle tap along the score line, the same patient technique as making our watering holes, and you have an instant mini cloche. Set it over a young seedling like a small greenhouse dome, leaving the cap off during the day for airflow, capped at night for warmth. This alone can push your planting season 2 to 3 weeks earlier in spring. Bottles pushed neck down and buried halfway along the edge of a garden bed, packed tightly side by side, make a surprisingly sturdy border edging. The glass holds soil in place during heavy rain, and unlike plastic or thin wood edging, it does not rot, splinter, or need replacing after a few seasons. I have a border like this along part of my own vegetable rows that has held its place for over 15 years without a single repair. A bottle with a narrow neck, filled with water, and hung upside down from a low branch or stake, with the cap loosely fitted and a tiny hole added, makes a simple drip feeder for potted plants when you travel. Steady, slow, and far cheaper than any store-bought vacation watering stake. Clear bottles, cut in half and turned upside down over freshly planted seeds in loose soil, protect against birds and heavy rain, while still letting light and warmth through, until the seedling is strong enough to push the bottle off entirely on its own. Colored glass bottles. blue, green, brown, strung along string or wire and hung near fruit trees or berry bushes, catch the light and move gently in the wind, and the flash and clink genuinely helps discourage birds from stripping your harvest before you get to it. My grandmother did something similar with old tin cans strung on twine along the edge of our rice patch, and I have simply carried that same idea forward with glass, which lasts far longer in the weather. A tall bottle set upright and marked with a permanent line for measurement, left open in a clear spot in the garden, becomes a perfectly functional rain gauge. No need to buy a plastic one that yellows and cracks within a couple of summers in strong sun. Bottles filled part way with water and set among your rows on a cold night can act as simple thermal mass, slowly releasing stored warmth overnight and helping protect nearby plants from a light, unexpected frost. An old trick used by growers long before electric frost protection existed. Small bottles, cleaned and dried thoroughly with a tight-fitting cork or cap, make excellent seed storage, better than paper envelopes in humid climates, since glass keeps moisture and pests out completely, and you can see exactly what is inside at a glance, sorted along a shelf. Bottles laid on their sides, half buried and grouped closely with the necks facing outward and slightly upward, make simple, sturdy plant markers when you slide a small painted label or stick into the open bottle mouth. Visible, weatherproof, and free. Cuttings from herbs like rosemary, mint, or basil root beautifully in a bottle of water set on a sunny windowsill, letting you propagate new plants for the garden without spending a cent at a nursery. Something my grandmother did constantly, keeping a small row of bottles on the kitchen windowsill each spring, cuttings from neighbors and family exchanged freely between households. And now let me show you the largest, most ambitious use of all, the one that takes patience, but rewards you with something that will outlast almost everything else in this list. If you save bottles steadily over a season or two, you can build a small bottle wall, a technique used in various self-built, sustainable structures around the world where whole bottles are laid like bricks within a mortar made from clay, sand, and a little lime or cob, creating a wall that lets soft, colored light filter through while remaining remarkably strong and insulating. I built a small cold-frame greenhouse against the south-facing side of my garden shed this way, using roughly 90 saved bottles, a simple mortar of local clay, coarse sand, and chopped rice straw for binding. The same basic cob principle behind traditional Okinawan and mainland Japanese earthen walls, simply adapted to include bottles as a lightweight, light-admitting building block rather than only chosen stone. I laid the bottles neck to base in alternating rows, packing the mortar firmly between and around each one, letting each course cure for a day or two before adding the next, the same patient layering I described earlier when curing an earthen stove. The finished wall holds daytime heat and releases it slowly at night, exactly the way a stone wall does, while the bottle ends let in a soft, diffused light that seedlings inside seem to genuinely enjoy. Total cost for materials beyond the bottles themselves, since I dug my own clay and sand, was close to nothing. Perhaps $10 for a bag of hydrated lime to strengthen the mortar mix. A gardener without access to free clay could substitute a simple sand and cement mortar instead, available for perhaps $20 to $30 for a project this size. A few more uses before I close this list, because a full 20 deserves to be given properly and not rushed. Broken bottle glass, when handled carefully with gloves, can be pressed neck up or edge up along the very top of a garden wall or fence base to discourage certain pests and small animals from climbing over. An old, practical trick still used in parts of rural Japan and elsewhere. Always used with care, and always kept away from paths where bare feet or hands might land. Bottles with narrow necks, filled with a mixture of sugar water and a small amount of vinegar, hung near fruit trees, make an effective, chemical-free trap for fruit flies and wasps drawn to ripening fruit. Simple, reusable, refillable, and completely free of the harsh sprays sold at garden centers. A bottle buried entirely, sealed, with a small stick pushed into damp soil beside it and left overnight, can serve as a simple humidity indicator for seed-starting trays kept nearby, letting you check moisture without disturbing delicate young roots. And finally, bottles simply laid along a garden path, half buried at a slight angle so only the rounded base shows, catch moonlight and starlight in a way that gently marks the path's edge at night, without a single cent spent on solar path lights that inevitably fade, crack, and stop charging within 2 or 3 seasons. 20 uses, and every single one of them starts with something most people rinse out and toss into a recycling bin without a second thought. I think often of my grandmother in her garden, and one memory in particular stays with me clearly. I was perhaps 9 years old, and I asked her, a little embarrassed, why our garden had so many odd bottles and jars tucked among the rows, when the neighboring family's garden looked so much tidier, so much more like something you would see in a magazine, with everything bought new and matching. She stopped weeding, looked at our garden for a long moment, and said, "Their garden is decorated. Ours is fed." I did not fully understand her meaning until years later. A garden built from what you already have, shaped by your own hands and your own patience, feeds you in more ways than one. It feeds your table, yes, but it also feeds a quiet kind of confidence, the knowledge that you do not need to depend on a store shelf to keep your family cared for. That is really what this whole list of 20 bottle uses is about, underneath the practical instructions. It is about looking at something the world calls trash and asking, honestly and carefully, whether it still has work left to give. Almost always, it does. Every bottle you save from the recycling bin and press into service in your garden is a small, quiet act of independence. One less thing bought, one less thing thrown away, one more piece of your homestead built by your own hand rather than a factory somewhere you will never see. This is not about being frugal for its own sake. It is about dignity, about self-reliance, about leaving behind a garden, a home, a way of living that says clearly, I did not need to be told what to buy. I only needed to look closely at what I already had. If you try any of these 20 uses, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you are gardening from, and tell me which use you are most excited to try first, or one of your own that I did not mention today. I read every comment, even the short ones, and I learned from you as much as I hope you learn from me. And next time, I want to show you something my grandfather taught me about preserving vegetables through a whole winter, using nothing but salt, clay, and patience. No refrigerator, no electricity. A method that fed our village through hard years long before anyone here was born. Until then, look twice before you throw something away. It is very often still asking to be useful.